The polished oak of the bird feeder gleamed in the late afternoon sun, a grotesque parody of rustic charm in the meticulously manicured garden. It was an expensive, artisanal thing, designed to attract goldfinches and chickadees, not to serve as a makeshift bowl for a 6-year-old child. Yet there she was. His daughter Lily stood on the perfectly level flagstone patio, her small face a mask of confusion and burgeoning shame. Her mother, Evelyn, was kneeling before her, a silver spoon in hand, scooping Cheerios from the feeder's tray. "Open up, little birdie," Evelyn chirped, her voice a high, tinkling sound that grated on Liam's nerves like grinding stone. "Tweet, tweet, tweet!" Beside her, leaning back in a wrought iron garden chair, sat Eleanor Harlow, Evelyn's mother. She held a crystal glass of white wine, and her laughter was a dry, rustling sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "Oh, Evelyn, you're a riot. Look at her. She doesn't know what to think." Liam stood motionless in the open doorway of the French doors, the weight of his leather briefcase a familiar anchor in his hand. He had just come home from a day of dismantling empires and building new ones, a day of moving figures that could purchase this entire neighborhood 10 times over, and he had walked into this casual, smiling cruelty. Lily's eyes, wide and pleading, found his. She didn't want this. She didn't think it was funny. A tiny tremor ran through her lower lip. "Evelyn," Liam said. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the light-hearted atmosphere like a shard of ice. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Liam, you're home early. We're just playing a game." "It doesn't look like Lily is enjoying the game," he said, his gaze fixed on his daughter. He took a step forward, and the carefully constructed mask of the unassuming, slightly out-of-his-depth husband began to crack, revealing the cold fury beneath. Eleanor set her wine glass down with a delicate click. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Liam, don't be such a dreadful bore. It's a bit of harmless fun." "Is it?" Liam's voice remained low, but it held a new resonance, a depth they had never heard. He walked past them and knelt in front of his daughter, ignoring the women. He gently took her small hand. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Lily shook her head, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path through the faint dust of cereal on her cheek. She threw her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder, her small body trembling with held-back sobs. Liam held her tight, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. This was not one isolated incident. This was the culmination. It was the final, ugly flourish on a masterpiece of casual degradation that had been years in the making. He had endured it all for Lily's sake, believing that a broken home was worse than a loveless one. But he saw now, with devastating clarity, that the foundation of this home was not just loveless. It was rotten with a contempt so profound it was now poisoning his daughter. He rose to his feet, holding Lily securely in his arms. He looked at his wife, at the petulant frown now forming on her beautiful face. He looked at his mother-in-law, whose expression was one of pure, unadulterated annoyance at having her amusement interrupted. They felt nothing, no remorse, no empathy. They were simply irritated that he had failed to appreciate their wit. "Go inside and wash your face, sweet pea," he murmured to Lily, setting her down gently and pointing her toward the house. "I'll be there in a minute with a proper bowl of snacks." Lily scurried away, eager to escape. Liam turned back to the two women. Evelyn stood up, brushing off her linen trousers. "Honestly, Liam, you're so dramatic. You ruin everything." He looked from her face to the bird feeder, then back again. For years, he had been the quiet architect, the man who built things. He had designed homes, offices, public spaces. But in his secret life, the one they knew nothing about, he had built something far larger, an empire of such scale and power that it cast a shadow over their entire world, even if they were too blind to see it. He had built it as a shield, then as a fortress. Now, it would be a weapon. The decision, which had been hovering on the horizon for months, crystallized in that instant into a simple, hard fact. It was over. all of it. He thought of the documents in his briefcase, the intricate web of holding companies, deeds, and debt obligations he controlled, all linking back to the Harlow family's inflated fortune. They thought he was a guest in their world. They had no idea he was the landlord. They saw him as a sapling struggling in the shade of their great oak. They couldn't conceive that he was the owner of the entire forest. "You're right," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I am dramatic, and I am about to ruin everything." Evelyn stared at him, bewildered by his tone. "What is that supposed to mean?" He gave her a long, unreadable look. It was the look of a man who had finally finished a complex calculation and was now ready to present the answer. The answer was 0. He didn't say another word. He simply turned and walked back into the house, the click of the closing door as final as a gavel strike. Evelyn and Eleanor looked at each other, a flicker of uncertainty finally dawning in their eyes. The game was no longer fun. Liam Sterling looked at the woman he had once loved, the mother of his child, and saw a stranger who found sport in humiliation. He knew then that the life they had built together was a structure with a rotted foundation, and he was the only one who knew just how deep the rot went. And soon, very soon, he would bring the whole thing down. Before the storm, however, there is always a story of how the clouds gathered. Perhaps you've seen a situation like this, where one person's kindness is mistaken for weakness. Where do you live in the world? Let us know in the comments, because this is a story that, sadly, could happen anywhere. But what happens next is what truly matters. The beginning had been nothing like the end. It had been a whirlwind of what Liam, in his naivete, had mistaken for a modern fairy tale. He met Evelyn Harlow at a gallery opening, a sleek, minimalist space he had designed. He was the promising young architect, heralded in niche magazines as a voice of quiet integrity and structural honesty. He was passionate, focused, and possessed a gentle confidence that came from knowing his own worth in his chosen field. He thought that was enough. Evelyn had seemed captivated. She was beautiful, of course, with the kind of polished radiance that spoke of generations of wealth and ease. But she also seemed intelligent, asking sharp questions about his use of light and space, his philosophy of integrating a building with its environment. She listened, her head tilted, her gaze intense. He learned later this was a skill she had perfected, the art of performative interest. Their courtship was a blur of expensive restaurants, weekend trips to the coast, and introductions to her glittering social circle. Liam, whose own background was solidly middle class, the son of a high school history teacher and a nurse, was initially dazzled. He was also on his guard. But Evelyn was a master at putting him at ease, laughing off his concerns. "My family is a bit much," she'd confessed one night, her hand on his arm. "But they have good hearts. They'll love you once they get to know you." The first meeting with the Harlows should have been a red flag the size of a billboard. It took place at their sprawling estate in Greenwich, a faux Tudor mansion that violated every principle of architectural taste Liam held dear. Richard Harlow, Evelyn's father, was a titan of old-world real estate. He was a large man, physically and in presence, with a booming voice accustomed to being obeyed. Her mother, Eleanor, was thin, elegant, and possessed a gaze that could appraise a person's net worth in seconds. And her brother Marcus was a younger, slicker version of his father, oozing an unearned arrogance. Richard had shaken Liam's hand with a grip that was more of a contest than a greeting. "So, you're the builder," he'd boomed, clapping Liam on the shoulder. "Evelyn tells me you design houses." The way he said it made it sound like Liam assembled Legos for a living. "I'm an architect, yes," Liam had replied calmly. Right, quaint," Richard had said, already turning away. "Well, make yourself at home. Don't be intimidated by the scale of things here." Throughout dinner, they peppered him with questions that were thinly veiled assessments. Where did he go to school? Not Yale, not Harvard. A state university, then. How practical. His parents? A teacher and a nurse. How noble. The subtext was clear. He was a project. A charming, talented, but ultimately common man whom Evelyn had decided to pick up. Evelyn had squeezed his hand under the table, mouthing, "I'm sorry." But she had laughed along with their jokes, never once defending him, never once drawing a line. This, he would realize later, was her defining characteristic, a complete inability to stand against her family's gravitational pull. She was a moon orbiting their massive, self-important planet. Despite the warning signs, he loved her. Or, more accurately, he loved the woman he thought she was, the one he saw when they were alone, away from her family's influence. He proposed 6 months later, on a windswept cliff overlooking the Pacific, and she had said yes with tears in her eyes. He believed their love could build a world of their own, separate from her family. It was his greatest miscalculation. The wedding was a Harlow production. It was less a celebration of a union and more a demonstration of their power and status. During his speech, Richard welcomed Liam into the fold, telling a story about a stray dog he'd once taken in that became a loyal champion. The guests had laughed, and Liam had to stand there and smile, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks. Evelyn had whispered, "That's just Dad's way," as if that excused the breathtaking insult. It was in the first year of their marriage that Liam began to understand the full scope of his situation. He had moved into her world, into a house she owned, decorated by her mother. His opinions were treated as suggestions to be considered and then gently dismissed. His clothes, his car, his friends, all were subject to Evelyn's subtle, relentless upgrades. He also began to see the rot at the core of the Harlow Empire. Richard's business practices were aggressive, often bordering on unethical. Marcus was lazy and incompetent, running a vanity import-export business that was clearly subsidized by his father. They weren't brilliant businessmen, they were bullies who had inherited a fortune and were leveraging it with brute force. It was then, in the quiet of his small home office late at night, that the idea for Sterling Horizon Group was born. It began as a defensive measure, a way to build something that was entirely his, a secret source of strength and independence. He used his own savings and a modest inheritance from his grandmother to start a small firm under an anonymous LLC. He took on projects in other cities, then other countries, under a pseudonym. His reputation in the architectural world had been real, and it turned out to be a powerful key. His designs, free from the compromises of the Harlow world, won accolades. He reinvested every penny. He was a brilliant architect, but he discovered he had an even greater talent: strategy. He began to see the world of finance and real estate not as a collection of buildings, but as a complex, interconnected structure. And he saw the fatal flaws in the Harlow's foundation. They were over-leveraged. Their success was a house of cards, built on reputation and intimidation rather than solid assets. He started small, buying the debt of one of their suppliers. Then he acquired a small, regional bank where Marcus had a significant, poorly secured credit line. He moved like a ghost through shell corporations and holding companies, his name never appearing on a single document. Sterling Horizon Group grew from a shield into a fortress. And then, as the insults and humiliations mounted, he began to sharpen it into a sword. He wasn't just building a secret fortune. He was methodically, patiently, and legally gaining control over the very pillars that held up the Harlow's world. He was playing a game of chess so long and so subtle, they didn't even know they were on the board. They thought he was a pawn. They had no idea he was the player on the other side. The humiliations were not a flood, but a steady, relentless drip, each one a small erosion of his dignity. Liam absorbed them with a patience that the Harlows mistook for weakness. They were 1,000 paper cuts, and they never realized that with each cut, he was adding another stone to the foundation of their destruction. The annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala was a cornerstone of the Harlow's social calendar, an event less about charity and more about publicly demonstrating their largesse. That year, Eleanor had taken it upon herself to handle the family's philanthropic portfolio. During the live auction, the auctioneer announced a new pledge. And we have a magnificent surprise donation, a new state-of-the-art pediatric imaging suite donated by the Harlow family in the name of their son-in-law, Liam Sterling. A wave of applause swept through the ballroom. The donation was $500,000. Liam froze, his wineglass halfway to his lips. He hadn't been consulted. He hadn't been informed. He felt 100 pairs of eyes turn to him, a mixture of admiration and pity. They all knew he couldn't possibly afford such a sum on his modest architect's salary. Evelyn beamed, squeezing his arm tightly. "Surprise!" she whispered, her eyes shining. "Mother arranged it all. Isn't it wonderful? It makes you look so generous." Makes him look. It wasn't about him being generous. It was about the appearance of it, an appearance they had purchased for him. Richard clapped him on the back, his voice booming for the benefit of those at their table. "Don't you worry about a thing, son. We'll take care of it. Just our way of helping you make your mark." He was a prop in their play. He had to stand, nod, and accept the applause for a gift he hadn't given, a public display of his own inadequacy. He smiled, a tight, bloodless expression. Inside, he made a cold calculation. The $500,000 they had so casually thrown around in his name was less than the interest his real company, Sterling Horizon, earned in a single day. That night, he went to his office and authorized the quiet acquisition of the primary mortgage on the very building the gala was being held in, a property owned by a subsidiary of Harlow Enterprises. It was a small, petty move, but it was satisfying. Another piece on his side of the board. A few months later came the project review. Liam had been working on a design for a new public library in a mid-sized city. It was a project he cared about, a chance to create a beautiful, functional space for a community that needed it. He had brought a small-scale model home to work on some final details. Richard and Marcus had come over for dinner. Spotting the model on a side table in the living room, Richard had picked it up with a dismissive air. "What's this little thing, Liam? Another one of your hobbies?" "It's a library I'm designing," Liam said, his voice even. Marcus peered at it, a smirk playing on his lips. "A library? How quaint. Does it have a lot of shelves?" He chuckled at his own wit. Richard, however, decided to play the role of the seasoned expert. He spent the next 10 minutes publicly dissecting the design. "The lines are too clean, Liam. It's sterile, provincial. There's no ambition here. To make a real statement in real estate, you need grandeur. You need weight. This is forgettable." Evelyn stood by, nodding thoughtfully. "You know, he has a point, darling. Maybe you could add some columns? Something more classical." Liam said nothing. He simply listened as they tore apart his work, their ignorance matched only by their arrogance. They had no idea that a larger, more ambitious version of that very design, submitted under his firm's name, had just won the prestigious Pritzker Architecture Prize, the highest honor in his field. The announcement was still a month away. They were criticizing a masterpiece, calling it doodling. He looked at the model, a symbol of his passion, being handled so contemptuously by these men who understood only size and cost, not form or function. He felt a profound, chilling detachment. They weren't just insulting him, they were revealing their own blindness. The deepest cut, however, came on Lily's 6th birthday. For months, Liam had been working on her gift in secret. He had designed and built an exquisite, perfectly scaled dollhouse. It was a miniature version of the warm, light-filled home he dreamed of one day building for just the two of them. Every detail was perfect, from the tiny working window sashes to the hardwood floors made of inlaid slivers of cherry and oak. It was a work of love, a piece of his heart. On her birthday morning, Lily's eyes had lit up with pure magic when she saw it. She had run her tiny fingers over the miniature furniture, her face a study in awe. Then the Harlows arrived. They swept in, bearing a mountain of glossy boxes. Their centerpiece gift was a child-sized, hot pink, battery-powered luxury car. It had working headlights, a horn that played pop music, and a personalized license plate that read, Lily H. The dollhouse was immediately forgotten. The quiet, intricate world of imagination was no match for the loud, shiny, immediate gratification of the car. Richard and Marcus made a great show of assembling it on the lawn, while Eleanor directed everyone's attention. "Look, Lily, a car just like Grandma's." Evelyn had knelt by the forgotten dollhouse. "Oh, Liam, this is so sweet," she'd said, her voice tinged with the pity one reserves for a well-intentioned failure. "We'll find a nice spot for it in the playroom." She had then promptly steered Lily toward the new, expensive toy, cooing about how much fun it was. Liam watched his daughter being strapped into the plastic car, a confused but excited smile on her face. He looked at the dollhouse, a testament to his love and skill, already gathering dust in the corner. And he understood. To the Harlows, value was something that could be displayed. It was loud, it was expensive, it was branded. Quiet craftsmanship, personal meaning, love, these were sweet but ultimately worthless currencies in their world. That night, long after the party was over and the pink car was parked in the garage, Liam went into his office. The news of his Pritzker Prize had become official that afternoon via a private email. He hadn't told anyone. He didn't feel triumphant. He just felt a cold resolve. He opened his laptop and pulled up the Harlow portfolio, the intricate map of their financial lives that he now almost completely controlled. He spent hours tracing the lines of debt, the ownership structures, the kill switches he had so patiently installed, the charity gala building, Marcus's import business, the loans on their second and third homes. It was all there. He was no longer just defending himself. He was preparing for a controlled demolition. The paper cuts had stopped hurting. Now they were simply entries in a ledger, a list of grievances waiting to be settled. And the final, unforgivable entry had just been made in the garden, with a bird feeder. The week that followed the incident with the bird feeder was cloaked in a strange and heavy silence. The air in the grand, sterile house was thick with unspoken words, a low-pressure system promising a storm. Liam moved through the days with a preternatural calm that was more unnerving to Evelyn than any argument would have been. He was polite, his voice measured, his actions deliberate. It was the calm of a surgeon before a complex operation, a general before a decisive battle. He was no longer a participant in their family drama. He was an observer, collecting final data points before executing a long-planned conclusion. Evelyn, for her part, tried to breach the silence with the only tools she had: dismissal and deflection. She found him in the kitchen 2 days later, making Lily a snack. Apple slices arranged in the shape of a flower, with a small bowl of caramel for dipping. "You're still upset about that, aren't you?" she began, leaning against the marble countertop. She was trying for a light, conciliatory tone, but it came out as brittle. The bird feeder, honestly, Liam, Lily thought it was funny. She forgot about it 5 minutes later. It was a blatant, effortless lie. Liam didn't even look up from his task. He simply continued arranging the apple slices on the small plate. "Did she?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Because she had a nightmare that night. She dreamt that giant birds were trying to put her in a cage. She told me she was scared because she thought you wouldn't help her." Evelyn flushed, a rare sign of genuine discomfort. "Well, children have active imaginations. You can't blame that on a silly little game." "It wasn't a game to her," Liam said, finally looking at Evelyn. His gaze was flat, analytical. It was as if he were looking at a structural flaw in a blueprint. "It was humiliating, and you and your mother enjoyed it. That's the part I can't seem to forget." She threw her hands up in exasperation. "Oh, I give up. You're determined to be miserable. You insist on seeing the worst in everyone. My family has done nothing but welcome you, and you treat them with this silent judgment. It's infuriating." He almost laughed. It was a bitter, hollow impulse. Welcome him? They had treated him like a stray they were trying to house train. He picked up the plate of apples. "I have to bring this to Lily," he said, walking past her without another word. The conversation was over. There was nothing left to say to her that she was capable of understanding. His focus was entirely on Lily now. He insulated her with a quiet bubble of love and attention. He took time off from his job, telling Evelyn he needed a few personal days. In reality, he had cleared his schedule at Sterling Horizon, delegating all but the most critical decisions to his trusted second-in-command, David Chen. He spent the days with his daughter. They went to the Science Museum. They had a picnic in a park far from their own neighborhood. They lay on the grass and found shapes in the clouds. In these simple, gentle moments, he was rebuilding what the Harlows had tried to chip away. He listened to her stories, answered her endless questions, and praised her drawings not as sweet, but as creative and full of energy. He was shoring up her foundations, ensuring that when the main house collapsed, she would be standing on solid ground. On Thursday evening, 3 days before the Harlows' annual summer solstice party, Liam was in his study. The room was his sanctuary, the one space in the house that was truly his. The Harlows saw it as the small, unimpressive office of a small, unimpressive man. They had no idea it was the command center of a global financial powerhouse. His phone buzzed with a secure, encrypted call. The caller ID simply read, DC. "David," Liam answered, swiveling in his chair to look out the window at the twilight descending over the perfectly manicured lawns of the estate next door. "Everything is in place, Liam." David's voice was crisp, efficient. "The final transfer of the Harlow commercial portfolio debt was completed an hour ago. We now hold the notes on every major asset. The authorities have the fraud file on Richard. The evidence is irrefutable. They're just waiting for the signal to move. The liquidation orders for Marcus's import company are drafted. It's all ready. All you have to do is give the word." Liam was silent for a moment, watching as the automatic sprinklers on the Harlow estate grounds switched on, casting arcs of water in the dying light. It all looked so perfect, so permanent, an illusion. "Hold for 48 hours, Liam said, his voice low and steady. "I have one last family gathering to attend." "Are you sure, Liam?" David asked, a rare note of concern in his voice. "You don't need to put yourself through that." "Yes, I do," Liam replied. "They built their world on appearances. It's only fitting that it comes down in front of an audience. They need to see it happen. They need to understand." He ended the call. He sat in the growing darkness, the only light coming from the glowing screen of his monitor, which displayed a complex flowchart of companies, assets, and lines of credit. It was a web of immense power, and he was the spider at its center. For years he had been patient. He had been quiet. He had endured. Now the quiet was over. The storm was just over the horizon, and he was going to sail directly into it, not as a victim, but as the master of the winds. The calm was about to break. The Harlows' annual summer solstice party was the crown jewel of their social calendar, a night where the full might of their wealth and influence was put on extravagant display. Hundreds of guests, a curated collection of old money, new money, and political power, drifted across the sprawling lawns of the Greenwich estate. A string quartet played Vivaldi from a gazebo. White-gloved waiters circulated with trays of champagne and ludicrously small appetizers, and the air hummed with the self-satisfied buzz of the elite. Liam stood on the edge of the main terrace, a glass of sparkling water in his hand, observing the scene. He was dressed as instructed by Evelyn in a tailored navy blazer and cream-colored trousers. He looked the part of the handsome, successful son-in-law. Tonight, however, the costume felt different. It was no longer a uniform of subjugation, but a disguise. He was a saboteur at the king's feast. Evelyn found him, her dress a shimmering column of silver. She looked radiant, animated, in her element. "There you are," she said, linking her arm through his. Her mood had lifted with the arrival of her guests. The tension of the past week was forgotten. plastered over by the demands of social performance. "Try to look like you're having a good time, darling. Mrs. Vanderbilt is here. Smile." He smiled. It was a calm, placid expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm having a wonderful time," he said, and the honesty in his voice was so absolute, so chilling, that she gave him a strange look before being pulled away by a passing acquaintance. He watched her move through the crowd, a queen in her court. He saw her laughing with her mother Eleanor, who was holding court by the fountain. He saw Marcus, her brother, bragging to a group of investors about a new deal, his gestures wide and his voice loud. And he saw Richard, his father-in-law, standing near the temporary stage set up for the evening's announcements, basking in the deference of his peers. They were all so confident, so secure in their universe. They were like aristocrats on the eve of revolution, utterly oblivious to the rumble of tumbrils just beyond the palace gates. An hour into the festivities, Richard Harlow stepped onto the stage, tapping a microphone. The quartet quieted, and a hush fell over the crowd. "Friends, family, welcome," Richard boomed, his voice amplified across the lawn. He beamed, spreading his arms wide as if to embrace them all. "Thank you all for joining us on this beautiful evening. As you know, we Harlows don't believe in standing still. We believe in building, in growing, in reaching for the sky." A polite ripple of applause. Liam took a slow sip of his water. He felt a profound stillness settle over him. "And in that spirit," Richard continued, his voice swelling with importance, "I have a very special announcement to make. For the past year, Harlow Enterprises has been working on our most ambitious project to date, a new benchmark for luxury living, a legacy. I am thrilled to officially announce the Harlow Crest." He gestured to a large easel, where an assistant dramatically unveiled a glossy architectural rendering. It depicted a monstrously large, ostentatious complex of glass and gold-tinted steel, a building that screamed money but had no soul. It was the architectural equivalent of Richard himself. The crowd murmured its approval. Richard let the moment hang in the air before continuing. "This will be the most exclusive address on the East Coast, a testament to what vision and drive can achieve." He then scanned the crowd, his eyes landing on Liam. A condescending smile spread across his face. "And speaking of vision, we believe in nurturing new talent. That's why I'm also pleased to announce that we're giving my son-in-law, Liam, a chance to get his feet wet on a real project of scale. We've created a junior supervisory role for him on the Harlow Crest team. A real opportunity for him to learn from the best in the business." A smattering of polite, knowing titters spread through the guests. Liam felt Evelyn's hand on his arm, squeezing it with pride. "Isn't that wonderful, darling?" she whispered, her voice ecstatic. "My father believes in you. This is your chance to finally do something big." The humiliation was exquisite in its perfection. It was public. It was condescending. It was framed as an act of generosity. It was the Harlow way, distilled to its purest form. They were offering him a bucket and spade to play with in the shadow of their sandcastle. Liam looked at Richard, who was still preening on the stage, waiting for him to show his gratitude. He looked at Evelyn, her face aglow with misguided pride. He looked at the faces in the crowd, their expressions a mixture of pity and amusement. He did not flush. He did not look away. He simply raised his glass of water in a small, almost imperceptible toast to Richard, and he smiled. It was not the tight, pained smile they were used to. It was a genuine smile, cool and sharp as a razor's edge. "That's a very generous offer, Richard," he said, his voice quiet, meant only for Evelyn. But his eyes were locked on the man on the stage. The overture was over. The opera was about to begin. As the polite applause for Richard's generous offer began to fade, Liam did not step back into the anonymity of the crowd. Instead, he took a single, deliberate step forward. He was still standing next to Evelyn, near the front of the terrace, and the microphone on the stage was sensitive enough to pick up a raised voice. He didn't raise his. He simply cleared his throat, a soft, deliberate sound. Richard, who had been about to step down from the stage, paused. "Yes, Liam? You want to say a few words? Thank me, perhaps?" He chuckled, and a few guests chuckled with him. "In a way," Liam said, and his voice, though calm, carried an unexpected authority that cut through the lingering chatter. A few heads turned. "Actually, Richard, I have a small announcement of my own. It's regarding the Harlow crest." A flicker of annoyance crossed Richard's face. This was his moment, his announcement. He would not have it upstaged by his charity case son-in-law. "Liam, this isn't the time or the place for—" "I think it's the perfect time and place," Liam interrupted, his tone still impeccably polite. "Because I'm afraid that project, the Harlow crest, won't be moving forward." He paused, letting the words land. "At least, not under your direction." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Evelyn tugged at his sleeve, her eyes wide with alarm. "Liam, what are you doing?" she hissed. Richard Harlow let out a short, barking laugh. "What on earth are you talking about, Liam? Have you been sampling something stronger than the champagne? The land is secured, the financing is in place, the contracts are signed." "They are indeed," Liam agreed pleasantly. "Which brings me to my point." He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and drew out a single, crisply folded document. It was a simple piece of paper, but he held it as if it were a scepter. The symbolic object. The key. I'm talking about the primary landowner and the sole financier for the proposed site. A rather private holding company by the name of Sterling Horizon Group. Perhaps you've heard of it? The name dropped into the opulent setting like a block of granite. While most of the guests were merely confused, a significant number, the bankers, the investors, the lawyers, visibly stiffened. Sterling Horizon Group was a legend in their world, a ghost that moved with terrifying speed and precision. It was known for its aggressive acquisitions and its utter anonymity. No one knew who was behind it, only that it was one of the most powerful and ruthless players in the market. Richard's ruddy face lost a shade of its color. That's a coincidence of name," he stammered, his bravado cracking for the first time. "A funny coincidence." "Is it?" Liam asked, his voice still light. He unfolded the document. It was a single page, bearing dense legal text and a signature line at the bottom. He held it up. "This is the signature page of the controlling partner of Sterling Horizon, the man who holds ultimate authority over all its assets and decisions." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the crowd before landing back on his father-in-law. "And the signature, as you can see if you look closely, is mine, Liam Sterling." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air from 100 lungs. The string quartet had stopped playing. The waiters froze in place. Every eye was locked on the unassuming man in the navy blazer, holding a piece of paper that had just rewritten reality. Evelyn stared at him, her face a canvas of pure, uncomprehending shock. It was as if her husband had just peeled off his face to reveal a stranger beneath, a stranger who wielded unimaginable power. Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked from Liam's calm, steady gaze to the document, his mind scrambling to process the impossible. "So, you see, Richard," Liam continued, his voice now taking on a sharper, harder edge, "when you offer me a junior supervisory role to learn the business, you are in fact offering me a job on a project that I, and I alone, have the power to approve or kill. And given your rather uninspired design," he said, gesturing to the garish rendering on the easel, "I'm killing it, effective immediately." He folded the document neatly and tucked it back into his pocket. He had just detonated a bomb in the center of their world, and he stood in the epicenter, untouched, while the shockwave tore through everyone around him. The man they had mocked, pitied, and condescended to for years was not just their equal. He was their master, and he was just getting started. The silence shattered. It was not a gradual return to sound, but an explosion of it. Richard Harlow found his voice, and it was a roar of disbelief and rage. "You're lying! This is a trick! A pathetic stunt!" Marcus, his face purple with fury, pushed his way through the stunned guests. "Who the hell do you think you are? You're a nobody. You married into this family." Liam didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The microphone was still live, amplifying his every measured word. "I am the man who owns the roof over your head, Marcus, and I am the man who owns your father's legacy." He turned his gaze back to Richard. "A stunt? Richard, for the past 5 years, you've been a frog in a pot of water, and I have been slowly, methodically turning up the heat. You just never noticed." He began to list the assets, his voice calm and clear, a litany of their ruin. "The land for Harlow Crest, which you thought you acquired through a proxy, was sold to you by a company I own and financed by a bank I control. The mortgage on this very estate, I bought it from the bank 18 months ago. The financing for Harlow Imports, Marcus's little vanity project, the entire debt portfolio belongs to Sterling Horizon. The majority shares in United Mercantile Bank, the institution that holds all your family's personal and corporate lines of credit. I acquired a controlling interest 6 months ago." He let the information sink in, a cascade of blows from which there was no recovery. "Every time you felt a financial pinch and found a friendly lender to help you out, that was me. Every time you bullied a smaller company into selling an asset, you were often selling it to me. You thought you were predators, but you were just cattle, moving through the chutes I designed for you." Eleanor Harlow let out a strangled cry and swayed, grabbing onto a nearby table for support. Her carefully constructed world of status and appearance had just been demolished. Evelyn finally moved. She stepped toward Liam, her face pale with shock, her silver dress seeming to mock the ashes her life had become. "Liam, I don't understand," she whispered. "Why? How?" "You wanted me to be more ambitious, Evelyn," he said, his voice softening almost to a whisper, though it still carried across the silent lawn. "You wanted me to be a man your father could respect. So I became him. And then I surpassed him. I just did it quietly. You were so busy looking at the surface, at the clothes and the car and the job title. You never bothered to look at the man himself. You never bothered to ask what I did in my study all those nights." It was then that a new sound intruded, the distant but rapidly approaching wail of sirens. A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was no longer just a financial drama. It was something else entirely. Richard's face, which had been pale, now turned a blotchy red. "You can't do this. This is illegal. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you into oblivion." "Everything I have done is perfectly, meticulously legal," Liam said, his voice turning cold as steel. "I simply outplayed you in your own game. You, on the other hand..." He let the sentence hang in the air as two police cars, lights flashing, pulled up the long, winding driveway and screeched to a halt on the gravel. The party guests scattered, creating a wide path as a uniformed sheriff and two deputies strode onto the terrace. The sheriff was a man in his 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a calm, no-nonsense demeanor. He scanned the scene, his eyes briefly meeting Liam's with a nod of professional acknowledgement. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice a low baritone. "Sheriff Bridge," Liam replied. The sheriff turned his attention to Richard Harlow, who was now trembling, not with rage, but with a dawning, primal fear. The arrival of law enforcement was a scenario so far outside his realm of experience, he had no script for it. "Richard Harlow," Sheriff Bridge said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of felony wire fraud and conspiracy to commit bank fraud." The final piece of the trap had sprung. The quiet architect had not just come for their money, he had come for their freedom. The pronouncement of the charges hung in the air, more shocking than any financial revelation. This wasn't a corporate takeover, It was a criminal matter. Richard Harlow, the untouchable titan, was being treated like a common felon on his own manicured lawn. Fraud? Richard sputtered, his voice a choked wheeze. That's preposterous. It's a lie. He's behind this. He pointed a trembling finger at Liam. He is, Sheriff Bridge confirmed, his expression unreadable. Mr. Sterling's firm uncovered significant irregularities in your loan application for the Northwood development last year. An application made to a bank his firm now controls. He brought a file to my office 6 weeks ago. The district attorney's office found the evidence compelling. Falsified asset statements, forged signatures, wire transfers designed to conceal the origin of funds. It's a rather comprehensive file. Liam stepped forward, addressing not Richard, but the horrified guests who remained, a captive audience to the Harlow's downfall. Richard needed a $100 million loan to cover losses he was hiding from his investors, Liam explained, his voice that of a lecturer detailing a case study. To secure it, he committed fraud. The evidence was buried deep, but I am a man who understands structure. I know how to find the load-bearing walls and the stress fractures. Your entire empire, Richard, was a poorly constructed building, and I just pushed on its weakest point. One of the deputies stepped forward and took Richard's arm. Sir, you need to put your hands behind your back. For a moment, it seemed Richard might resist. His entire life had been predicated on the belief that rules were for other people. But looking into the impassive faces of the deputies, and then at Liam's cold, resolute expression, the fight went out of him. His shoulders slumped. He looked suddenly old and small. As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he stared at Liam, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost a physical force. You did this, he rasped. You did this to yourself, Liam replied, his voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a grim finality. Your greed, your arrogance, your belief that you were above consequences. I just turned on the light so everyone could see. The deputies led the stunned, shuffling Richard Harlow toward the waiting patrol car. The patriarch of the Harlow dynasty was being taken away like a common criminal, in front of everyone whose opinion he valued. It was a humiliation more complete than any he had ever inflicted. Sheriff Bridge then turned his attention to Marcus, who had been standing frozen, his slicked-back hair now slightly askew, his face a mask of dawning horror. Marcus Harlow? I didn't do anything, Marcus stammered. Your import-export business, Harlow Imports, was listed as a primary asset on that fraudulent loan application, the sheriff stated flatly. As such, it's being seized as part of the ongoing investigation. We'll also be executing a search warrant at your office tomorrow morning. The DA seems to think there may be some significant tax discrepancies. My advice to you is to hire a very good lawyer, immediately. Marcus looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. His vanity project, his claim to being a businessman in his own right, was gone. He stumbled back, his face ashen, and sank into one of the pristine white garden chairs, his head in his hands. Eleanor, who had been watching the scene unfold in silent, rigid horror, finally broke. A low, guttural sob escaped her lips. She collapsed into a weeping heap, her perfect posture, her social grace, her entire identity shattered in the space of 10 minutes. The queen had been deposed, her kingdom dismantled. All the appearances, the status, the carefully curated illusion of perfection, it was all gone, revealed as a hollow facade. Amid the wreckage of her family, Evelyn finally turned back to Liam. The shock had receded, replaced by a deep, aching chasm of betrayal. Her voice was a broken whisper, the last sound in a world that had fallen silent. Liam, why? It was the question he had been waiting for. It was the question that everything, for years, had been leading up to. He looked at his wife, the woman he had once loved, the mother of his child, and prepared to give her the answer she deserved. Not the financial answer, not the legal answer, but the human one. The party was over. The remaining guests, who had been held in place by a morbid fascination, now began to melt away, whispering amongst themselves, eager to escape the blast radius and spread the news. The flashing lights of the patrol car receded down the driveway, taking Richard Harlow and the last vestiges of his family's honor with them. The sounds of Eleanor's weeping and Marcus's stunned silence filled the void. It was a private moment in the midst of a very public disaster. Liam looked at Evelyn, and for the first time, he let the full weight of his accumulated pain show in his eyes. There was no anger left, only a profound, exhausted sadness. "Why?" he repeated her question, his voice so soft she had to lean in to hear it. "You really want to know why?" He didn't wait for an answer. He began his list of grievances, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact, a catalog of the 1,000 cuts that had finally bled their marriage dry. "It started the first time I had dinner here, when your mother called my parents dirt-poor farmers because my grandfather owned a small plot of land in Ohio. And you laughed, Evelyn. You called it her wicked sense of humor. It was the night you corrected my use of the word less instead of fewer in front of your friends from the yacht club, patting my hand as if I were a child you were teaching to speak. It was the day I came home to find the painting my mother made for me, the one she finished a week before she died, gone from the wall. You had replaced it with a soulless $50,000 abstract because, you said, my mother's painting didn't match the new decor. You put her last gift to me in a storage unit, Evelyn." He ticked off each memory, his voice steady, each word a carefully placed stone on the scales of justice. "It was every time your father called my work quaint. Every time your brother asked if I needed a loan for lunch money. Every time you stood by and said nothing. You were the silent enabler, the one who co-signed every insult with your inaction. You chose their casual cruelty over my dignity, time and time again." He paused, taking a breath. "But I could have endured all of that. For Lily, I told myself that a man endures, a man provides, a father stays. I am a patient man, Evelyn. I was willing to live in the shade, as long as my daughter could feel the sun." His gaze hardened, the sadness momentarily replaced by a flicker of the cold fire that had fueled his secret war. The moment it ended, the absolute final moment, was a week ago, in the garden, when I came home and saw you feeding our daughter, our beautiful, smart, sensitive little girl, cereal out of a bird feeder. Like she was an animal, a pet, a thing for your and your mother's amusement. And you laughed. You laughed at her shame. Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face now, but they elicited no sympathy from him. "In that moment," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "I realized you hadn't just lost respect for me. I think you lost that a long time ago. You had lost your fundamental humanity. You were willing to humiliate a 6-year-old child, your own child, for a cheap laugh. And I knew, with a certainty that was as absolute as gravity, that I would not have my daughter raised by someone like that. I would burn down the world to keep her safe from that poison." He reached into his jacket again, but this time he pulled out a different set of documents. They were legal papers, bound in a simple blue cover. "The life you know is over," he said, his voice flat and final. "Your father is going to prison. Your family is bankrupt. The accounts are frozen. This house will be seized and sold by the end of the month. You have nothing." He laid the papers on a nearby table. "I am filing for divorce, and I am filing for sole physical and legal custody of Lily. This is your one and only choice. You can fight me. You can drag this through the courts, and I will use every resource at my disposal. And as you now understand, my resources are effectively infinite to win. I will submit the security footage from the camera in the garden, the one you forgot was there. I will bring in child psychologists. I will prove to a judge, beyond any doubt, that you are an unfit mother. Your name will be dragged through the mud until there is nothing left." He pushed the documents slightly forward. "Or you can sign these papers. You agree to the divorce. You agree to my custody of Lily. You agree to supervise visitation, contingent on you seeking therapy. In return, I will set up a modest but stable trust for you. Enough for an apartment, a car, and a chance to build a life. A real life, not this performance. The choice is yours, Evelyn. A futile, ugly war, or a quiet, dignified surrender. Evelyn stared at the papers, then back at his face. The man she thought she knew, the gentle, pliable man she had married, was gone. In his place was a stranger made of ice and steel, a man who had judged her and found her wanting. She crumpled, her body racked with sobs of pure, unadulterated despair. The one who had so casually humiliated others was now utterly and completely humbled. The reversal was absolute. She reached a trembling hand toward the papers, her gilded world in ruins around her. 3 months later, the autumn leaves were turning, painting the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. The air was crisp and clean. Liam and Lily were in the garden of their new home, a beautiful modern house made of warm wood, glass, and stone. It was a house Liam had designed himself, not as a statement, but as a sanctuary. It wasn't as large as the Harlow estate, but it was infinitely bigger, filled with light, laughter, and the scent of baking bread. Lily, now 7, was thriving. The haunted, uncertain look that had so often clouded her eyes was gone, replaced by the bright, confident spark of a happy child. She was kneeling in the soft earth, carefully planting tulip bulbs with her father. There were no decorative bird feeders in this garden, only simple wooden bird houses they had built together, nestled high in the branches of a sprawling oak tree. "Do you think they'll be red or yellow, Daddy?" she asked, patting the soil down with her small, dirt-caked hands. "The package said it's a surprise mix," Liam said, smiling. "We'll have to wait until spring to find out. That's the fun part, the waiting." He knew a great deal about waiting. He looked at his daughter, her face so open and full of joy, and he felt not the sharp thrill of victory he might have once imagined, but a deep, quiet sense of rightness. The demolition of the Harlow Empire had not brought him pleasure. It had been a necessary, somber act, like the amputation of a diseased limb. He had not done it for revenge, he realized, but for restoration. The restoration of his own soul, and more importantly, the restoration of his daughter's childhood. The anger that had fueled him for so long had burned away, leaving behind a clean, quiet space where peace could finally grow. His life was his own again. Sterling Horizon Group was no longer a secret weapon. He was beginning the process of stepping out of the shadows, attaching his own name to his work, not for glory, but for the simple honesty of it. He was still a builder, but now he was building a life, not just an empire. Once a week, a black sedan would pull up to their gate. Evelyn would get out. She was different now. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple, tasteful outfits. Her hair was styled more naturally. The mask of polished perfection had been stripped away, and the woman underneath was more subdued, more uncertain, but also more real. She lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in the city, paid for by the trust Liam had established. She was in therapy, as per their agreement. She was working a part-time job at an art gallery, something she had always claimed to love, but had never needed to do. Her first few supervised visits with Lily had been strained and awkward. Evelyn had tried to win her over with gifts, a desperate echo of the Harlow way. But Lily, guided by Liam's quiet wisdom, was more interested in connection than in things. Slowly, haltingly, Evelyn began to learn. She started leaving the gifts behind. She would sit on the floor and listen to Lily talk about school. She helped her with a drawing. On her last visit, she had watched as Lily proudly showed off the birdhouse she and Liam had painted. For the first time, Liam saw a flicker of genuine, unselfish love in his ex-wife's eyes. A look that was not about possession or appearance, but about simple maternal pride. There was a long road ahead for her, a mountain of her own making to climb. But for the first time, She was on a path that might lead to a genuine redemption, not for his sake, but for her own. Liam watched her car pull away that afternoon, a familiar pang of old sorrow mixing with a new, tentative hope. He had not been cruel. He had been just. He had delivered consequences that were proportional to the transgressions. Richard was serving a minimum 5-year sentence in a federal prison, his health failing. Marcus was mired in legal battles, his reputation destroyed. Eleanor lived in a small condominium in Florida, a ghost of her former self, her social circle having evaporated overnight. They had all faced a reckoning directly related to their own sins: arrogance, fraud, and a profound lack of character. Poetic justice. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Liam pulled his daughter into a hug, breathing in the scent of her hair and the rich, dark earth. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true strength isn't about how much you can acquire, but about what you are willing to protect. True worth isn't measured by the applause of a crowd, but by the quiet integrity of your own heart. And respect, the thing he had been denied for so long, was not something that could be demanded or bought. It had to be earned, built, piece by piece, like a home, on a foundation of honesty, courage, and love. The world Liam had destroyed had been an illusion. The world he was building now was real. And as he and Lily went inside to wash up for dinner, leaving the sleeping tulip bulbs to dream of the spring, he knew it was a world that would last. What do you think? Did Liam go too far? Or was his response a necessary and just action to protect his daughter? Everyone has a line, and the Harlows crossed it one too many times. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of quiet strength and ultimate vindication, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption. We all deserve to see the underdog have their day.